G'day guys, Jared Powell here, back with another episode of On the Shoulders of Giants. This month, I'm bringing to you a conversation I had with Ben Cormack. Now, Ben is a British physiotherapist. He's an original thinker. He's one of my favorite people to listen to and follow, basically for challenging my own beliefs. He's very good at that, and he does that all too frequently. But we have a conversation about the biopsychosocial model, something we've probably all heard of and studied to some degree. We kind of know what it is, but when we delve into it, what is the biopsychosocial model? Why was it proposed 50 years ago by George Engel, and what was it in response to? And is it a complete model, or do we need to further our understanding of it? Anyway, without getting too deeply into it in the introduction, I bring to you my conversation with Ben Cormack. Cheers, guys. All right, here we are with Ben Cormack, the infamous or famous Ben Cormack. Not sure which one you are these days, mate. Everybody knows who you are these days. You're vocal, and I love it. You've got your opinions, and you're not afraid to say them. So thanks very much for getting up early over there in the UK to have a chat with me.
Yeah, no, thanks for inviting me, and it's great to be included amongst some of the fantastic guests and yourself that you've had on previously.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's always good to be able to, through the wonders of the internet, talk to people all around the world. So for the three people who don't know who you are, Ben, just give them a brief synopsis of who you are as a person, what you do professionally, and what you like to do recreationally.
Yeah. So my background originally is what's called sports therapy in the UK. I do a number of different things, actually. What I do like to keep it interesting. So I do bits of clinical work still, maybe 10, 15 hours a week on a busy week. I run something called the Better Clinician Project with another very shy and retiring gentleman, Adam Meekins. And then also I have my own kind of educational company called Core Kinetic, which is really just, reaching out and trying to get some of the things that interest me out there into the public and see if that interests them as well. So I like to keep it pretty varied professionally, something I've always enjoyed doing. What do I do recreationally? Now that's a great question. That's the real insight into the man, isn't it? So I'm a pretty active person. I enjoy going to the gym, doing my boxing. That's one of the big things that I enjoy, both little bits of coaching and doing that. And then just, spending time with my family and trying not to think about kind of MSK physio type of things as much as possible. But that never happens.
Yeah, it's a passion, isn't it? On boxing, quickly, AJ and Fury, is it ever going to go ahead?
Well, this is the classic, isn't it? It's the classic money and TV networks and this guy and in terms of the promoters and all those kind of things. So I think it's probably too big not to happen, because who doesn't want that money, right? There's a lot of money there. When it happens and how it happens, we don't look at Tyson and Lewis is a great example. They didn't meet until I think it was maybe early 2002. I can't remember. But it was certainly when they both weren't in their prime. Exactly. So it will happen. When does it happen? That's the question.
It was the same with Mayweather and Pacquiao. Talked about for 15 years, right? And Pacquiao wasn't Pacquiao, and it was a shame.
Yeah. There you go.
So Ben, let's get on to the actual stuff, mate. Let's get on to.
Oh, that wasn't it.
That's well, we could have an hour. I do want to pick your brains about boxing, but we'll leave that for off air. I'm sure it's boring for others.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about the biopsychosocial model as proposed by George Engel. Now, you're kind of renowned for having an interest in this area, and I'm interested into how this became an area of interest for you, because there's lots of things to be interested in musculoskeletal physiotherapy or musculoskeletal medicine. Why did the biopsychosocial model stand out to you as something to investigate and to analyze?
Now, that's a great question. That's a great question. I really like that. Well, firstly, I think it's certainly something that's not just me. It's certainly built in prominence over the last 5 or 10 years. There's lots of papers that come out that say biopsychosocial this and biopsychosocial that. I think the thing that really interested me is what it actually says, what actually the main cut and thrust of what George Engel was trying to say. And that's this idea of humanism within helping people, this idea of the person as a person. And actually, I think there's a bit of a selfish reason behind my interest. And that's because that side of it has probably always resonated with me more than some of the more technical, anatomical, these type of things. So I'm probably much better at dealing with people than I am at finding bony landmarks. Right. So from that sense, it's something that says to me, this kind of fits with who I am, how I like to practice, what I think is important, what fits my style, if that makes sense. So there's a bit of a bias in there, but I think that I believe in personality and character and connection and relationship. That's the way that I like to live my life, my values, my friends, my family. And I think that those things really, really resonate with me as a person. So, as I said before, I'm much better at that than many other things. And I probably hold that as a higher importance than many other things that I've learned before, like what you do with these, or, how much neurotransmitters are floating around in your brain, or these type of things. So it's probably, in some ways a little selfish in that it just resonates with me rather than like a higher scientific reasoning type of thing.
That's cool. That's how interests emerge, don't they?
Yeah.
So you sort of found something within it that you agreed with. There wasn't some epiphany, some moment when you were treating someone with a tight QL in their lower back and you go, there's got to be something more to this.
Well, I'm sure I don't know if I'd call them epiphanies. It's more like, I really haven't got a clue what's going on here. There's got to be something else going on. But there was this moment as the sun set in Ibiza and I was looking, no, that's a lie. But it sounded good, right? So there was never an epiphany. It's like all these things, I think that they grow on you. It's a bit like mold. They probably grow a little slowly along the way and you raise your interest. And the other thing was that I kind of kept seeing this word and it meant something different to the other people that were writing it. So I'd read a paper that was like the biopsychosocial approach to exercise or this or that or the other. And I actually thought, this doesn't sound like what this other guy was talking about when it comes to the biopsychosocial model. I don't really feel like these things are one and the same. And that probably leads to me being a bit vocal, or as we say in the UK, a bit mouthy, about kind of, my thoughts in this area. Because it was like, hang on a minute, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't sound right. That's missing the point. And, I don't want to be that dick who points out the point, but I do like to point out the point.
It needs to be done. It needs to be done. And you're always there to do it, Ben. It's good.
Thanks, bud.
You keep me honest. I always think about you actually when I'm like writing stuff and I'm like, what will Ben say to this? So it's good. Keep it going.
Wow.
Ben, can you tell me what the biopsychosocial model is? Can we define it? And mate, what is it? Is it a philosophy? Is it a theory? Is it an ideology? Is it an algorithm? Is it a framework? Is it a heuristic? What is it?
It's all of those things, actually. And I've got a little quote from Engel because he said this, and I think it's important. And as I was saying to Jared off air, I've got a paper coming out with Peter Stilwell and Joe Gibson looking at this exact question. What did Engel say? And that's kind of, the premise of the paper that we write or have written, and now it's going through the process. So this is what Engel said. He said, a biopsychosocial model is proposed that provides a blueprint for research, a framework for teaching, and a design for action in the real world of healthcare. So it's kind of all of the above, right? So when people say it's models, it's not a model, it's a framework. Well, actually, Engel uses model and framework in the same sentence. Do you see what I'm saying? So I don't feel Engel was there to say, this is how you do it. This is what it's all about. So I think it's much more a philosophy or a theory. Now, people who've worked, on this since then, there's a great paper by Beryl Corio from 2004. And that's exactly what they call it. They call it a philosophy of care. Right. So again, it's not I don't like the word blueprint, because blueprint to me sounds like it's, a design, it's set out. But certainly I like the idea of philosophy, because for me, it's about how do I approach the process of working with a person. So what's in my mind before I sit down, like today at about 10 o'clock, I've got a patient. And before I switch on my computer, fire up Zoom, get into it, I'm going to be thinking, what do I want them to feel? What do I want them to think? How do I want them to go away and say, what was that like for me? So in terms of that is our philosophy. And a philosophy is just thinking, isn't it, really? We can get very, very technical with philosophy and talk about, old German guys and some old Greek dude and all these other things. But its very essence, philosophy is just thinking, right? So our personal philosophy, and I'm big on defining personal philosophy because I think it guides us, doesn't it? It's our own kind of guide in the dark, if you like. And so for me, I like that philosophy of care, because it's saying, what do I want from this encounter for the other person? Not what do I want for me? What do I want for the other person involved in this? So philosophy, a philosophy sits quite nicely with me. Now, someone else might say it's a framework or heuristic or, a model. But I think Engel was really quite loose with this. As that sentence showed, it was kind of a bit of everything. He wanted you to have that thought in his mind when you worked with a patient. If you're looking to research something, he wants that thought in your mind to say, how does this fit into that? And so, philosophy fits quite nicely for me. Now, the problem with that is that then it throws up all these interpretations, doesn't it? And then people critique the interpretations and it all gets into a game of Chinese whispers. And I think that's what's happened with the biopsychosocial model a little bit, is we've twisted it and turned it a little bit to suit what we're trying to do. And this is going to be controversial. I actually think the biopsychosocial model, it might even evade scientific exploration sometimes in its essence. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's very controversial, Ben.
Yeah, but his ideas were he thought he didn't like the ideas of dualism, right? So the mind and the body. And if you think about what's happened to the biopsychosocial model, is it's been, as Peter Stilwell would say, it's been trichotomized. So instantly it's been reduced into these bits. And then we reduce it into an outcome measure, or we reduce it into a very discrete research question. And sometimes I think that it evades our current scientific methods to be able in its very essence. And so sometimes I think these two things are butting up against each other, that actually that we're trying to research this by using an entirely different philosophy.
That's interesting. Okay, so let me get my head around that.
In there.
So we're kind of, we're getting into ontology and epistemology here, right? Because so perhaps using a biopsychosocial model is our view of reality, as it were, in healthcare, and that's an ontology. So we just got to accept that.
Yeah.
And then within that, we can study things around it without governing or sort of being the overarching framework for how we acquire knowledge, and that's epistemology. Anyway, I don't think we're going to get anywhere down that line of inquiry.
No, it's I don't want to.
No, that's very good. Neither do I. Good, mate. Good. Let's shelve that. We'll leave that for the philosophers. But it's fascinating that you think that perhaps the biopsychosocial model might evade science, and what I assume you mean by that is by quantitative science and etc.
Yeah. It doesn't evade science, but does it fit into our scientific philosophy and our scientific process in its very essence?
Yeah, and kind of topical at the moment, because I'm hearing some rumblings and I'm reading some rumblings and I'm feeling some rumblings deep within my core, Ben, about physiotherapy. Is physiotherapy too complex as a profession? I don't want to say an intervention, but how do we measure our effectiveness? Well, not effectiveness, efficacy. Like, can we ever compare physiotherapy, perhaps, or even exercise? Let's say exercise to a placebo. Does that evade science? And I know we've kind of had some conversations about this on Twitter, and a lot of people have got opinions, but can you reduce something so complex as exercise? Because it's multidimensional. It works by so many different mechanisms. How can we then get a placebo of that? Because that's quantitative science, that you need a placebo-controlled trial.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that? I know it's off topic.
If we think about kind of like a placebo pill, right? You have an active ingredient, don't you? And you know what that active ingredient is because you put it in the pill. So you are testing this active ingredient. You know exactly what it is, right? It's however many milligrams of whatever funky stuff they do. And you're going to compare that against an inert thing. That's really what a placebo is, isn't it? It's an inert object. It doesn't exert an influence in traditional chemical sense, right? Problem with exercise is we haven't got a clue how it works. So what is the active ingredient? What is not the active ingredient? So I don't think we have enough knowledge about the intervention sometimes to actually be able, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think that has to be, again, does it come back to philosophy first in that, how do we go about that process of designing that? It's not, if you take an ultrasound machine now, if you look at ultrasound research, they kind of detune it, don't they? They tune it differently to create a dosage that's different. And they have exactly the same process that occurs. Some dude goes like that and then rubs, this ultrasound thing on you. Now, one is working with a precise dosage and one is working with an imprecise dosage of whatever ingredient goes into that. And we don't have either a precise or an imprecise dosage. We don't know what the active ingredient is. And I think that makes it quite tough to be able to do. So I think that, we need to know more about how exercise works to be able to ask the next stage of the question. So there's something behind the thing. Does that make sense? Now we could say that, so we could play with different dosages. We could play with different exercises in different areas. Can an exercise ever be a placebo? Is it always got an active ingredient? Heart rate, blood flow, basic biochemical processes that are occurring within the body when I move it. So I don't know whether it ever could be described as inert or inactive.
I agree. I really don't think it's possible, given our current understanding of the universe, to design that. And I think that's interesting because, therefore, if we just look at the hierarchy of evidence as almost deifying the randomized controlled trial, we have to kind of rethink that. And that's interesting. Anyway, when you started talking about evading science, that's what came to mind. And we're going to go down a rabbit hole, but I think we might, again, just shelve that because I do want to just focus on the biopsychosocial model, mate. All right. So stop leading me down the garden path. So
you're the one doing the leading, buddy.
Agree. The blind leading the blind, perhaps. So let me talk. So let's go back to 1977.
I was born in 78. So 77 was just before me, but that's fine.
Just before your time, but just before you came into the world, Ben. Luckily, you came into an earth that the biopsychosocial model had been invented. Otherwise, it would have been barbaric. It would have been the dark ages.
Yeah.
So why did George Engel suggest the biopsychosocial model? What was it in response to? So the biomedical model was obviously the champion at the time and arguably still is today. Why wasn't that sufficient? Obviously, that had led to great advances in medicine and health and well-being. Why replace it?
Yeah, so I mean, let's not, Engel he wrote this down, but he certainly wasn't the first person to think about these things. You know, you go back to William Osler in the mid 19th century, you know, so he was saying, listen to your patient, they're telling you the diagnosis, etc., etc. You know, one of those, I love those pictures where you have William Osler in black and white looking out, saying profound things.
So sage.
But yeah, you had Osler, you had Sommerweiss, you had Peabody. You know, there's a really nice timeline there going from the mid 19th century up through the 20th century to the late 20th century. So Engel was only building on what had happened before. These aren't new thoughts. And I think we could go back to whenever and wherever, and someone saying, actually, there's a person involved in all of this, right? And so there's a video that's floating around of Engel talking in the 80s, maybe late 80s. And, you know, he's an old guy by then. And what he focused on when he was talking about, and this is really important, what he focused on when he was talking about it was this idea of humanism, this idea of it being a person, working with a person. And, you know, again, our traditional models of science have focused on that reduction, hasn't it? You know, if we talk about pain science, we tend to go into ion channels and, you know, magnesium plugs and, you know, pushing things across cell membranes, and which is all fantastic stuff, but it's definitely falling down the hierarchy, right? We're definitely going downwards. If we look at Engel's, the second paper, the implementation paper, you know, I think that was 78 or 79. He has this hierarchy, and we can go up, we can look at two-person medicine, we can look at family, we can look at society, we can look at the goddamn universe, or we can go downwards and we reduce things down into these smaller parts. Now, science often goes one way when we are talking about many things, you know, so we do have big epidemiological stuff that does look at things from a higher level or a greater level rather than a higher level. You know, a criticism of a hierarchy is it's hierarchical. So a flat ontology might be another way to look at it. But, you know, really for me, there are some overarching principles. So firstly, you start off with this idea of humanism. So Engel suggested that the biomedical model dehumanized medical practice. That was his terminology, dehumanized medical practice. Now, we have this idea of dualism. So Engel was a psychiatrist, and this idea that we're separating mind and body. And you could say that modern approaches with the three balls, you know, the three domains, whatever you want to call them, that is in its own way a reductionist way of viewing it. And then also this kind of idea of reductionism. So humanism, reductionism, and then also dualism as well. And I think those are the three things. And actually, Engel seemed to me always to be a little bit like not everything comes back to quantification. You know, that he's talking about, in his sense, the tests that we do, you know, blood gases and, you know, whatever else people send off for, which are useful pieces of information. And they tell us about the disease, the problem that the person has. But there's this other idea, and people like Leventhal with the common sense model have built on this, is that we have the disease, which is maybe something you can objectify. And then you can have the illness, which are the things that exist around the disease. And I think actually, you know, our modern perception of that might sometimes be that we've turned pain into the disease, so that, you know, we're objectifying it, we're giving it numbers, etc. And, you know, what's more interesting, and if you look prognostically, I think if, you know, look at some of the wonderful prognostic research into musculoskeletal problems, it's nearly always the psychological stuff that, you know, I don't want to reduce it, but it tends to be more prognostic than actually the more objective diagnosis side of things. So if you look at a prognostic model rather than a diagnostic model, we're definitely seeing some of the human factors and the thoughts and the feelings and the behaviors maybe maintain many of these problems more than the actual pathology side of things. So sometimes I think, you know, if we look at it from that sense, that humanism and understanding the person and how they behave and their thoughts and their feelings and their experiences do seem to have a profound influence on what happens. So I still think that, you know, even 30, 40 years later, 40 odd years later now, we're still only really touching the very, very edges of what Engel was talking about.
Yeah, he's quite ahead of his time, really, wasn't he? So it was kind of suggested or proposed, at least formally, in response to his perceived thoughts on the dehumanization tendency of the biomedical model, and also the dualistic nature of the biomedical model, and the reductionist nature of the biomedical model. So if we just speak about dualism for a moment, so I guess I assume you're referring to Cartesian dualism here. Yep, as you mentioned a moment ago, separation of the mind and the body. What does that mean for a normal physio? So maybe just equate that to pain. What's a dualist interpretation of pain, and why is that relevant for the biopsychosocial model?
Yeah, because I think what it does is it separates this sensation from the person. What I mean by that, so I always have a crappy little saying that I use. It's not just the way it feels, but the way it makes us feel, if that makes sense. So it's not just the sensation. And I think we focus mostly on the sensation. VAS is about sensation. If you think about modern pain science, it mainly focuses on why the stimulus and the sensation don't always equate. So hurt and harm. So why, I can amp up, the sensation at these multiple points with these multiple mechanisms that occur within my body to do with all these kind of fancy chemicals, your endogenous opioids or your NMDA or MDMA, I can't remember. Right, they do different things, I've heard. So it's, and I think that's, for me, that's the main factor, is that if we're going to talk about separating and even then, the mind and the body, sometimes we talk about the brain and the mind the same. We're really getting into the philosophical weeds here, but thoughts and feelings aren't just predicted by neurotransmitters, if that makes sense. There's a secret sauce that we haven't quite worked out yet, I think there. So for me, really, it's about not just the sensation, not just how much it hurts, but it's also, and maybe there's a term that people use called affect, which is starting to think about the emotion and these kind of the valence and these type of things. But even then, when people talk about affect, they're talking about the unpleasantness. That would be a definition of affect, the unpleasantness of the sensation. But really, can we boil down affect into unpleasantness? That doesn't work for me. That's too simplistic, because we have lots of maybe different emotions or feelings that arise, not just according to the sensation, but my experience with the sensation. Whether that's with healthcare, whether that's with the media, whether that's with family. And that's the big thing, is it's not just how it feels, it's the way it makes me feel. And then moving on from that, and this is where we get into kind of inactive stuff, etc. What does it make me do? And then even beyond, what does it make me do? What are the affordances and the constraints in my environment? In that, what am I allowed to do? Or what can I actually do? Yeah. So we keep, it's like a Russian doll, isn't it? We're just building and building and building and building. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, that's very well said. It's kind of like, what's that quote? There's a quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson that says, as the area of our knowledge expands, so does the perimeter of our ignorance. And it's kind of like that, isn't it? You study something, you learn something more, and there's more and more questions that are revealed. I love that.
Or just, more ignorance comes up, but it's more what next? If what? We're going through more logic gates, aren't we? We're opening up one, and then we're coming up against another, and but that, I think that's exactly what we need to be in response to this, is rather than think, have we got it figured out? Is it solved? It's just a journey, and it's just one where you have to accept that you don't know very much, but we're just going a little further each time, potentially.
Yep, 100%. And then reductionism, and we kind of mentioned that's fairly self-evident in terms of reducing complex things such as pain, such as experience, such as physiotherapy, even down to its constituent components, as low and as low and as low as you can go. And
a great example of that for me would be something like a questionnaire. Is that we are reducing someone's fear their individual, feelings in response to an action, such as a movement or whatever, can we reduce that into a questionnaire?
Yeah.
That for me would be a classic way that we've taken the biopsychosocial model, and we've done exactly what we did before. And I describe that as looking at the biopsychosocial through a biomedical lens.
Mm. Yeah, that I've got a quote right here that says the biopsychosocial theory starts by trying to avoid dualism and then in practice becomes dualistic.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I guess that kind of leads us onto here. I want to have a look at, or analyze, or investigate, or explore, whatever word you want to use, Ben, some of the criticisms or the critical appraisals that have started to come in thick and fast, actually, over the last few years towards the biopsychosocial model, which I guess is a good thing. And it tends to happen as things become more and more popular and more entrenched. The biopsychosocial model seems to be mentioned in every single paper that's published these days. And that's a good thing, but there needs to be some analysis of how it's actually used in practice or how it's interpreted. And you've got some cool stuff to say here. So I think anyway, so the biopsychosocial model commonly, and I think Peter Stilwell and Catherine Harmon said this, commonly fragmented, commonly trichotomized, or even dichotomized, right? It's bio and then psychosocial.
Yeah, they're beautiful, yeah.
And so so these are valid criticisms, right? But is that a problem of the conception? Is that a problem? Is that what Engel actually meant? Or is that our problem of interpretation? Which is it?
Well, yeah, again, this forms the cut and thrust of the paper that me and Peter and Joe have written recently, is what are the interpretations? Now, I think there are two main interpretations here. One would be the causation model, where we are trying to define causative factors for this person's problem. Is it a bio problem? Is it a psycho problem? Or is it a psychosocial problem, as you pointed out? It often doesn't even get trichotomized. It's still, just dichotomized. And so it's very much, if you pick up a paper about the biopsychosocial model, and if you read, we know an introduction to a paper is saying, why do we need it? What is it all about? Now, how many times have you ever read a good synopsis of that author's philosophy around the biopsychosocial model, right? What they usually do is reference another paper. Now, it will say the biopsychosocial model commonly used in practice, number 4, right? And often that's the Gatchell paper. So many people have cited the Gatchell paper, right? 2007. I can't remember the title. So it's the biopsychosocial approach to chronic pain. And, that would, for me, fall into more of a causational model, where we are looking at factors that have influenced this person's pain, right? So what is driving their pain? What is causing their pain? And I think that is quite a common approach that's taken, this causational model. Now, and that tends to be pain around pain, right? Where it gets a bit interesting is where you start to look at doctoring models, so MD models, where they take much more of this philosophy of care approach. And that would be another interpretation, which would be this humanistic interpretation. So we see these two major kind of interpretations that are out there. But I still think if you want to write a paper about the biopsychosocial model, you actually, in your first paragraph, have to say what you believe it is. Where are you getting these influences from? What are we talking about here? Because you could be sitting here talking about the biopsychosocial model. I'm sitting here talking about the biopsychosocial model. We're using exactly the same terminology, mainly the word biopsychosocial, but we're talking about two different things. And I think that's fascinating, because I see these type of discussions where people are using the same terminology, but that terminology is leading to two different interpretations of what's being discussed. And so I think we need to start to define it. But definitely, I think the two major things that we're talking about are this causational model. What is driving this person's pain? What can we identify that we can fix? Which I would say is a bit of a biomedical perspective. And then there's this other side of it, which is about who is this person? what is their problem, how is it affecting their lives, and maybe how we're going to approach it. So I would say actually the interpretation tends to drive the criticism.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's linger for a moment on this notion of causation and use of the biopsychosocial model, perhaps wrongly. And I think this is what we fall victim. This is kind of our common mistake in physiotherapy. I'm speaking general here, but I myself routinely make this mistake. Somebody comes in, I'm trying to be well-rounded, I'm trying to be holistic, and in my mind, I think in categories. So I'm kind of like, okay, like what's happening biologically here? When I say biologically, everything could be biologically, right? But I'm thinking structurally, I'm thinking cellular, I'm thinking molecular, I'm thinking in a reductionist manner. And then I'm like, what's happening here, perhaps in their thoughts, feelings, and their beliefs, right? And then I'm thinking about what are the social determinants of health? What's this person's health literacy? What's their story? What's their background story there? And then I'm thinking all of these things. There's a lot happening, Ben. And then we're meant to what? We're meant to ask a couple of questions there. How's your mood? How are you feeling today? Okay, cool. I asked about that. Check that box. Where did you grow up? Okay, check that box. Now let's go and do some exercise. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's very hard to get away from this reductionist and fragmented interpretation of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it's about, again, we're talking about a process there, aren't you? You're talking about your process, your internal process of dealing with a patient. And part of that is driven by your education, your experiences, and the framework that all of us had to go through to get to the point we're at. You know, that formed the backbone of your training, didn't it? So it's almost an inbuilt way of working, an autonomic response, maybe in some senses. So, you know, I mean, I haven't got an answer for you because no one else has got one either, and that makes me feel quite good. You know, so certainly that's, I think, where it has to fall into a philosophy sometimes rather than, you know, how do we do it in a different way? I don't know how we should do it in a different way, but I do think that, you know, behind the process, there should be a philosophy that guides, you know, should your process change? I don't know. You have a framework to work in, you have a clinic structure, you have a medical structure, you have a legal structure. These are other social constraints that are working on you. But underlying all of that, what is your philosophy of care? And that's why I probably gravitate towards that as well, because I think we're trying to focus on the nuts and the bolts sometimes without focusing on the actual bigger picture of how do I make this constrained process a better experience for the user.
Yeah, focusing on the finger instead of looking at the moon. That's a really good point. So I like the second iteration, or perhaps probably the wrong word in terms of the humanistic or the medical doctor interpretation, where it's a philosophy of care. You're taking into account that human, or you're trying to step into that individual's shoes for a moment in time and try and figure out what their experience is and trying to facilitate and coach and guide and get that person back to life. Do you think that would be a more effective use of the biopsychosocial model? Perhaps when I'm speaking there, it's kind of sounding a bit more effective use. It's all scientific causation kind of stuff. It's hard to get away from the vernacular. But is that a more? Well, help me out.
You're talking about patient-centered care, aren't you? And that would be another iteration. And this, again, I can't remember that it was a Scottish guy in the mid-80s who started talking about Craig. I can't remember his name. It's too early for me, Jared. But he started talking about patient-centered care. I think his seminal paper is 86, even though I can't remember what his bloody name is. You know, and that is an iteration, a cyclic process of another cycle of the biopsychosocial model. It's an offshoot. You know, that's what patient-centered care really is, isn't it? You know, that's the point. And another thing that we've tried to do in our paper that you know should see the light of day at some point soon is we've tried to actually say, how do we merge these things together? You know, how do we actually take this philosophy of care, this humanistic model, as we call it, and this causational model, and try and bring them together. And actually, for me, I like the concept of a relationship-centered model. So it's not about person or patient. It's actually about two-person medicine. And two-person medicine, again, is a core principle of the biopsychosocial model and patient-centered care. So this idea of we don't exist in a vacuum. We exist in a relationship in what we're doing in terms of helping people. And then we exist within an embedded society. And so how do we bring these things together, I think, is important, because we still have to think about causation, pathology, the bio, I hate that term. We have to think about those things because they form part of what we're doing. But how do we integrate those into a wider sense of what we're trying to do? And again, it's all very bloody philosophical, isn't it? But we all need a little bit of philosophy about what we think is important, how we work. And if we never think about that, I think we just get caught in this trap of just doing the same tick box exercises. And that is exactly what Engel was talking about.
Yeah, I know. It's embarrassing, really. The thing I fear, Ben, though, is you do all this work. You publish something, it's great, it has great success, then somebody tries to use it in a clinical trial versus something else, and it's quantified again. It's like, and it's this basic outcome measures of pain and disability or range of motion or whatever it is, these biological, these physical outcome measures that perhaps don't exactly capture the whole damn point of the thing in the first place.
Which is exactly what I said, does it?
That's precisely exactly right. So where are we at? How do we reconcile being a science-informed profession and having an overarching framework that perhaps evades science? There's a paradox, and I'm not sure. And it makes me, I have sleepless nights sometimes thinking about this, because I'm becoming more and more I'm becoming more and more aware of the restrictions and the restraints and the limitations of science when studying complex things. I think science is amazing, and I'm such a quantitative guy in terms of my past, but I'm starting to see the shortcomings of it. Now, that doesn't mean I want to abolish and get rid of the science at all from our profession, but how the hell do we incorporate that and reconcile that with this mysterious kind of non-scientific or qualitative or experiential based side of our profession?
Yeah.
Tough.
So, I think we have to view it as a different type of science, don't we? And, that would be the kind of premise. And again, even, if we look at the randomized control trial, and then you actually look at a patient outcome, again, it's sometimes hard to put those two things together, population level data versus individuals, and people like Cause Health, Roger Kerry, those guys, they've written some fantastic stuff in these kind of spaces, much smarter than I could ever even hope to be. But I suppose it's something, and I haven't got an answer for you, of course, because I don't think anyone else has, which makes me feel better. But at least you're considering the problem. So we do have to think about, how does this outcome measure, this piece of data, fit into our wider philosophy? So the question I always ask, and this generally doesn't get any responses. Let's take person-centered care, patient-centered care, relationship-centered care. I don't give a monkey's what we call it, right? And if we found out that it made no difference to disability, to pain, to healthcare utilization, is it something we shouldn't do? So let's take these major, but if we take these major outcome measures that we measure efficacy by, right? So, the big ones, and we get a big trial, and it says actually being nice to people, making their experiences good, made no differences to these outcomes. It doesn't work. What now? Where next? Do you see what I mean? Is it now something? Well, it doesn't matter. Let's just forget it. Because when you listen to a patient with long-term persisting pain, who's had a terrible experience in healthcare. No one's ever been able to help them either, you know, in their how do they feel, not just how does it feel. You know, is that something that we don't worry about because it wouldn't have changed the outcome measure anyway? You know, so that's always something that says it to me. Is it how do we measure the efficacy of something? What are we measuring? Does it relate to what we want it to achieve?
Yeah, exactly right. And that's kind of topical because of that reassurance paper that just came out recently by Aidan Cashin.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we can improve, we can make somebody feel reassured. However, outcomes are no better. But you don't stop reassuring people, do you? It's just a fundamentally human thing to do.
You know, and I had a bit of a discussion about this the other day. Someone would say, well, our intention is never to say don't do it. But the way that people interpret research is it works or it doesn't work. That's that dichotomous Nyman-Fisher, you know, setting your alpha level. If you come up 1% short, we disregard it. We set the hypothesis, you reach the threshold. And if it doesn't reach that threshold, then it doesn't work. Let's toss it. Let's accept the null hypothesis. And, you know, is that the right way to measure some of these things? Now, some people will say yes. Some people will say no. It's all above my head.
Yeah, me too. It's all right. So good to talk about it anyway. Okay, so let's say, for example, the biopsychosocial model in its current carnation,
iteration would probably be a decent word there.
Iteration is incomplete.
Yeah.
What alternatives do we have? You're writing a paper now with Peter Stilwell. Peter Stilwell is famous for his inactivism paper and now affordances paper. So is this a superior alternative?
Well, I look, again, you know, is superior. Again, that comes back to is there an efficacy? Do you see what I'm saying? But again, it highlights the kind of, we take one thing and then we have to find something that's superior or better or works. And the answer is, I have no idea. You know, I don't even know if my thoughts go to it's going to work better, but it's another interpretation.
Is it a better? Does it account for more? Is it more explanatory? Does it offer more possibilities?
I feel it's a more complete explanation when we look at what Engel was trying to get at. So I actually think, you know, that people have done wonderful work in this space. You know, some people highlighting things that it isn't, other people interpreting things that it is. And at some point, I think we may need to bring these things in together to form more of a complete interpretation that says, actually, maybe the best approach is to bring these things into harmony rather than say it's this or it's this or it's this. And so is it better? I don't know. Do I believe that it's more complete given the interpretations, given what Engel wrote? I think so. But that doesn't mean that it is, because I'm obviously biased in this one.
Yeah. So perhaps the philosophy and the ideology or the theory of it is more complete. But does it change our clinical practice?
Oh, God, blimey. Now there's the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Will it change me in the clinic tomorrow? First thing, if I adopt an activism approach. Fine.
But what does that mean? What is changing what you do tomorrow? Is that the way you handle a knee? Is it your philosophy? Do you see what I'm saying?
The way I practice as a physiotherapist.
Yeah. So for you, I would hope that you sit down in your chair and you say, how am I going to approach this encounter? That you are going to say, I realize there's another human there, and that actually probably exerts quite a large influence on what happens. And their experiences are important. And I would like to walk a bit of a mile in their shoes, or whatever, kind of little quote we can throw out there. So how does it change your practice? Usually that tends to be how we approach a test, or how we coach an exercise, or how we diagnose a pathology. Maybe we need to see changing practice as, how do I approach what I'm trying to do? What are the important things? What is my philosophy? about the overarching process, not just a technique or an exercise or a diagnostic tool, which generally is what is changing. You know, that what's it going to do for you tomorrow? Well, I've got this wicked exercise for lower back pain, or I saw this amazing new special test. Well, maybe it's actually the way that you approach how you do things and what is important to you and what is important to the other person. And someone else may say that's a load of philosophical claptrap. Yeah, you know, so again, it's in the eye of the beholder, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it obviously depends on the individual as well in terms of how they have been practicing. But it is interesting to think about if the biopsychosocial model is enacted upon, to use an activism and biopsychosocial at the same time, is enacted upon as Engel intended, however he intended. And I think what he intended is actually quite a bit obscure, as you mentioned a moment ago. It's a little bit open to interpretation.
No doubt.
And perhaps that's what he wanted to do, but maybe he thought he was just starting a thought and would let his descendants improve upon it. If we were practicing, Ben, in your opinion, and this is just your opinion here, in what you perceive to be a really good interpretation and application of the biopsychosocial model, is that an appropriate way, or is that a way that you would recommend many people who are physiotherapists to try and practice? And sort of, is that a sufficient philosophy to underpin their clinical practice? Or do you think it is incomplete to the point of it needs to be improved upon, like immediately?
Like right now.
Like yesterday.
Right now. So look, I personally believe, and again, this is maybe going to come across as a bit of a new age hippie pot smoking kind of thought process, you know, and that's generally what I try to do on a daily basis, is be a new age hippie. You know, I believe actually I think your first week in therapy school, whether you're a physio, chiro, osteo, whatever, should be thinking about who you want to be as a therapist, right? Who are you? What underpins you? What are your values? What do you hold dear? You know, what is your way of approaching the world? So our personal philosophy. And I also believe we should look at the philosophy of evidence-based medicine in the first couple of weeks, because that's going to say, actually, what is EBM, this thing, or EBP? What is this thing that's guiding us? You know, how do we reconcile population data and individual data, etc.? And I don't think we, you know, and this obviously changes along the way. So, but I don't think we give enough thought to who we are, how we want to practice, what underpins what we're trying to do. Often it's about, this is the way that you do it, this fits in. And I think, so I don't think that we should take Engel's philosophy. I think we should listen to Engel and integrate it into our philosophy. And I think everyone should take 5 minutes to say, why do I do what I do? Who am I? What am I doing here? You know, what are my values? And so I think that really is, you know, that for me would improve a lot of different things. And again, I suppose it's like epistemology, isn't it, in a way? You know, what is driving, guiding, and defining how we're thinking about these things? In that case, knowledge. In this case, you know, practice. But what underpins what we're doing? So again, it might be some people are driven by other types of philosophy, stoicism or whatever else. I don't know. But I certainly believe that we don't take enough time to think about, you know, what we're trying to do and how we do it. And I think that maybe taking a moment to do that would probably have an influence on how you do things and how you're guided through this process. Because I think sometimes it's autonomic, isn't it? It's about just ticking the boxes, writing down the VAS, doing this, and then out the door. So, you know, we probably need a bit of a paradigm change in this sense, in that we should probably force people to be a little bit more introspective about the way that they work in relation to other people. That would be my thought.
I love it, mate. I love paradigm. We're bringing up Thomas Kuhn. We can't get any more philosophy than this. But I do love what you said there. You're so right. At university, we're taught there's one objective reality.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's your job as a detective in health to go in, find that objective reality that is causing that person's pain, and then you intervene and you solve it. And the way you intervene is actually going to lead to a specific outcome. For example, if something's tight, you loosen. If something's weak, you strengthen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's this positivist type of interpretation of science, isn't it? And yeah, just a basic 6-week perhaps module at the start on the philosophy of science or the philosophy of evidence-based medicine, and just introducing all these topics: realism, ontology, epistemology, the Kuhn's interpretation of science and Popper's interpretation of science, and all of these things. It'd be a fabulous place to start, wouldn't it? Because then you could go on and you could actually critically appraise the things that you learn, because I don't think we should stop learning about special tests and things. It's important to know how to do things and turn the arm this way and that way and screen range of motion, et cetera, et cetera. But it'd be nice to do it from a philosophically enriched background.
Yeah, and then you have all these students asking all these questions and questioning you, and so I can see practically why. So you form 30 people in a class who are all philosophically woke, and that must be a nightmare for a teacher.
6-week course, yes.
So look, but you know, one of the things that's always been said to me is, "Oh, you're just going to confuse them. You know, that there isn't enough time, or you're going to confuse the students, or whatever." And, you know, so I don't know whether that's a viable way of, and again, do you come up against a system? So we have the system of education, and that is its own social constraint, isn't it? It's, you know, it's within how we do things. But personally, I believe that would make a big change. I'm sure, you know, that pot smoking hippie part of me, the utopian, whatever, you know, people are out there going, Ben, that's ridiculous. But I do think that may change from within how people start to approach the consumer experience.
Well, as you said at the start, philosophy is just thinking, mate. And if we're not going to encourage thinking, then where are we as a profession? So I think what harm can come of it apart from a little bit of a friction in the lecture room for the first couple of years, perhaps. It's got to do good for the profession in the long term. All right, Ben, I could talk to you all day, mate, but I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions. What book are you reading right now? And be honest. And what TV show are you watching with the missus right now as well?
So I just I'm reading Exercised by Daniel Lieberman.
Cool. How's that?
So I got that, and actually my Kindle broke, so I bought it as an actual book. So I have that. So in the UK, it was really sunny up until about a week ago. Now it's just rained for the last week, because obviously that's a British summer. So I love sitting in the garden in the sunshine reading my book. So I haven't done a lot of reading in terms of the last week, but Exercised is the book that I've got about 100 pages through. And it's an interesting read. I'm not sure I always agree with everything Lieberman has to say. I don't always know if I like even the way that he says it, but it's definitely an interesting book. The other question was about a TV series, right?
Yeah, you're watching anything on TV?
What have I been watching? So me and my wife always have something on the go. So we just finished watching something called Mayor of Easttown, which was a HBO American thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How is it?
I've forgotten her name, the English actress, Kate Winslet, which is like a detective thing. Someone dies, they have to work out who did it.
Love it.
7-parter, you know, easy watching. So we've been watching it. And obviously we are watching the football, because obviously it's the big European Championships a year late. England are playing Germany tomorrow night, so that's going to be, you know, huge. Yeah. So it's a bit spicy, it's a bit fruity. I think we're up to and Wimbledon starts this week.
Yeah,
I do like a bit of tennis, I must say.
Wimbledon is, because that wasn't on last year either, Ben. So everyone must be absolutely looking forward to that. All right, brilliant, mate.
Raining, so let's. Yeah.
Where can people find you, Ben? What's your socials of choice?
Well, I'm very shy and retiring. And it's very difficult to find me, I'll have you know. No, look, I'm a right mouthy, you know, trumped up little boy. So you can generally tend to, I'm quite, you know, prevalent talking crap on all the social media channels, just under Core Kinetic, which is just, people ask me, what does Core Kinetic mean? Well, it was just Cormack and movement. So core as in Mac, and then kinetic as in moving. So that's that. But really quite simple stuff.
Good. All right. And I absolutely can recommend to everyone to go follow Ben, even if you don't always like what he says. I think you'll be better for it, because it's about, and what you do really well, I think, Ben, is you just challenge. And I think you do it from a good place. And I think it's never personal. It's always about the subject matter. And I think that's super important. Because and what I like is you can kind of do it to yourself as well. And that's really important. So keep doing you. I really appreciate what you're doing, and thanks for coming on and having a chat.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure.
All good. Cheers, mate.